Hello and welcome. Today, I'll be taking you through the intense twists and turns of the 2018 drama thriller 10 by 10 spoilers ahead, so beware. The story begins with Kathy Newland, our protagonist, living her seemingly ordinary life. She runs a flower shop, enjoys breakfast at the nearby diner, and regularly attends yoga classes. However, things take a dark turn when she realizes she's being followed by a mysterious man named Robert Lewis. Lewis watches Kathy from a distance, lurking outside her yoga studio and inspecting her car. Then, ominously, he retrieves disturbing items: a gun, zip ties, tape, a plastic bag, and a newspaper from his car trunk, setting the stage for the chilling events to come. After tossing the items onto his front seat, Lewis keeps vigil, waiting for the right moment, and takes a call from his maid, Alondra, who assures him everything is set for the night. Meanwhile, after her yoga class, Kathy lingers in the changing room, briefly chatting with another woman and clearly disapproving when the woman hints at cheating on her husband. Kathy then heads to the parking lot, preparing to go home, but just as she nears her car, Lewis strikes. He lunges at her, covering her head with the plastic bag and throwing her to the ground, attempting to suffocate her. Kathy struggles fiercely, managing to push him away and pull the bag off, fighting for her life. Kathy cries out desperately for help, but fate isn't on her side. A passerby, oblivious with headphones on, walks by without noticing her struggle. Taking advantage of the moment, Lewis seizes her again, warning her that he'll kill her if she makes another sound. Swiftly, he tapes her mouth shut and secures her wrists and ankles with zip ties, leaving her helpless on the pavement. Lewis returns to his car, watching as the vehicle next to Kathy's departs, allowing him to park closer. Then, with chilling precision, he picks her up, locks her in his trunk, and drives away, his grim plan fully underway. As Lewis drives toward his home, tension mounts when a police car pulls up beside him at a traffic light. Keeping his composure, he avoids drawing any suspicion and soon arrives at his house. However, the garage door jams midway up, forcing him to lift it manually and prop it open with a broom. Carefully reversing his car into the garage so the trunk faces inside, Lewis opens it and pulls Kathy out, her bound and bleeding feet leaving a trail of blood on the floor as he drags her through the house, marking the beginning of a terrifying ordeal. Lewis drags Kathy into a concealed 10 by 10 cellar, which he hides behind a fake wall adorned with a table and vase, trapping her in this dark, soundproofed prison. While she struggles against her restraints, he casually puts food in the oven, retrieves her bag and his items from the car, then returns to her cell. Calmly, he tells her there's no use in screaming, because no one will hear her through the thick, soundproof walls. After she nods, he peels the tape off her mouth, asking for her name, but she only screams louder. Frustrated, Lewis leaves her alone in the darkness and retreats to his office, leaving Kathy to grapple with the horror of her situation. Lewis checks his computer, ensuring every movement in the cellar is recorded, though he mutes the sound, blocking out Kathy's desperate noises. Afterward, he methodically cleans the bloodstains left from dragging her inside. Meanwhile, Kathy, refusing to give up, manages to stand and throws herself against the door repeatedly, but it won't budge. Frustrated, she kicks the wall panels, only to realize it's futile. Desperately scanning the room, she spots a vent and positions herself as close as she can, screaming for help, though the remote location of the house means her cries fall on empty air. As Lewis listens to an old news report about a reopened case involving 3 mysterious deaths, he quietly loads his gun and, steeling himself, heads back down to face her. Desperate, Kathy pleads with Lewis not to harm her, offering him the $50,000 she has in savings. Lewis, intrigued, comments on the surprising amount for someone in her line of work, yet dismisses her offer. He isn't after her money. Instead, he insists on knowing her real name. When she replies, Kathy Newland, he's visibly disappointed and leaves her alone once again. In the kitchen, Lewis rifles through her bag, finding nothing useful. Frustrated, he turns back to the news reports. This time, the story highlights how evidence in a recent case wasn't enough to prove unnatural deaths, leading to the case's closure and igniting the family's resolve to challenge the decision. As Lewis returns to cooking, Kathy contorts her body with determination, managing to wriggle her bound hands in front of her. When he arrives to bring her lunch, she's ready waiting behind the door. The moment he steps inside, she launches her attack, throwing punch after punch until he's on the floor, then delivers a hard kick before rushing out. In a final burst of defiance, she grabs the vase from the table and shatters it against his head, buying herself precious seconds to escape. Kathy scrambles to his office, desperately reaching for the landline to call the police. But just as she dials, Lewis appears, shooting the phone and shattering her last hope for immediate help. As Lewis approaches, Kathy seizes a paperweight from the desk and strikes him hard, knocking him out for just a few seconds. She seizes the chance, rushing to the kitchen where she finds her cell phone in her bag only to realize there's no signal. Desperately, she rummages through the drawers, finds a knife, and quickly cuts the bindings on her ankles, hoping to escape. But every door she tries is locked, trapping her still. Just then, Lewis stirs, coming to his senses. Kathy, defiant, demands to know how he knows her occupation, but he only responds by calmly sitting at the table and, disturbingly, inviting her to join him for lunch. As Lewis eats, he calmly asks Kathy for her name again, and she replies with the same answer, Kathy Newland. Pointing out that guns beat knives, he forces her to sit at the table, though she refuses to touch the food. Lewis then notes that if he wanted her dead, he would have already killed her, pressing her once more to reveal her true name. When she repeats Kathy Newland, his patience snaps, and he hurls his plate at her face in fury. Rising from the table, Lewis advances with his gun drawn, but Kathy seizes the moment, knocking the weapon from his hand and lunging to strike him. Lewis counters with a brutal shove, slamming her against the kitchen counter as their deadly struggle intensifies. In a desperate bid to free herself, Kathy bites Lewis, causing him to pull away long enough for her to wrap her bound wrists around his neck, choking him with all her might. But it's not enough to knock him out. As she tries to escape, Lewis delivers a powerful punch, knocking her unconscious before dragging her back to the cellar. When he returns to the kitchen, he's met by his maid, Alondra, who came over because he hadn't told her whether he'd need her that day. Lewis, irritated, tells her she's not needed and sends her away, but Alondra insists on staying to clean up the broken dishes and tend to his wounds, unaware of the dark reality unfolding around her. Growing more desperate, Lewis tells Alondra he's just having one of those days and urges her to leave, though she hesitates before agreeing, promising to return the next day with his daughter, who's at a sleepover. After she leaves, Lewis starts cleaning up the mess, carefully placing the flowers in a new vase and washing the bloody knife. He then checks on Kathy, tending to her wounds with butterfly bandages before taking a shower and tending to his own injuries. Finally, he finishes his lunch in front of the TV, watching more old news reports about the Charleston 3, a mysterious case involving 3 patients who died under strange circumstances at the All Angels Hospital in Charleston. Meanwhile, Kathy, in a moment of desperation, retrieves her cell phone from its hidden spot in her pants, but finds there's no signal. Frustrated, she tucks it away and notices a cracked floor tile. Determined, she begins working on prying the shard loose, hoping for a way out. Just then, Lewis returns, carrying a chair, and sits down in front of her. With a chilling calmness, he begins interrogating Kathy, asking her intimate details about her life, her name, her birthday, her hometown, her school, her major, the number of siblings she has, her parents' professions, and even her relationship with the church. Each question a reminder of how trapped she truly is. Kathy answers Lewis' questions, but he isn't satisfied. He coldly reveals that he's been following her for months and knows everything she just told him is a lie. With chilling precision, he continues to press her for the truth. Desperate, Kathy finally changes her story when Lewis shoots the wall, the loud bang forcing her to comply. She admits her real name is Natalie and Stephen, and that she grew up with her twin sister, Kathy, who tragically took her own life after their father, doctor for a football team, left their mother for a cheerleader. Natalie, however, didn't give up. She pursued her mother's footsteps, studying nursing, determined to carve out her own path despite the darkness that had consumed her family. Having finally admitted the truth, Natalie, now drained, listens as Lewis coldly tells her she must be wondering why he kidnapped her. He simply suggests she probably already knows the answer before leaving the room once more, taking the chair with him. As the door clicks shut, both of them experience an emotional breakdown, Natalie trapped in her sorrow, and Lewis overwhelmed by his own guilt and torment. While he retreats to the living room to watch old family videos, clinging to some semblance of the past, Natalie returns to the cracked floor tile, determined to make progress. Frustrated by her lack of success, she takes out her phone again, pressing it against the vent, and after a moment of desperation, she finally catches a signal, a small but vital glimmer of hope in her dire situation. Desperately, Natalie dials 911, her hands trembling as she tries to ask for help, but the weak signal makes it nearly impossible to reach anyone. Meanwhile, Lewis, watching a video, spots a cell phone and realizes she must have taken it with her into the cellar. He rushes in just as she hides it, yanking it from her pants and smashing it to pieces, leaving the broken parts scattered on the floor. Without missing a beat, the interrogation begins again. Natalie, now vulnerable, admits she once worked at All Angels Hospital, and Lewis presses her about the patients who mysteriously died under her care, including his wife, Alana. The weight of his questions hangs heavy as the truth he seeks becomes painfully clear. Natalie, holding on to the truth, reminds Lewis that there was a trial and all the nurses were found innocent. She explains that she left town simply because she needed a fresh start. But Lewis isn't convinced, and he begins to outline the clues that had raised his suspicions. He tells her about John Lamptey, a man who died of organ failure just a month after passing his medical insurance, something that struck him as odd. Then there's Alana, his wife, who had been missing her wedding ring, something she never took off, and had been unusually drunk, given she rarely drank. To top it off, her body had been found filled with GHB, a drug commonly used to incapacitate victims of abuse. Each fact weighs heavily in the air, his growing doubt making the atmosphere even more oppressive. Lewis doesn't just suspect Natalie, he is certain of her involvement, and with chilling finality, he tells her that if she doesn't confess, she will die just like the others. After checking his computer to ensure it's still recording every sound in the cellar, he retreats to the living room to watch old family videos. Seeing his deceased wife on the screen shakes him, and overwhelmed with emotion, he rushes back to the cellar, his gun aimed squarely at Natalie's head. With the barrel pressed to her, Natalie finally relents and begins to confess. She and her sister grew up in a strict, religious household where they followed the teachings of the Bible to the letter. But everything changed when Kathy discovered their father was sleeping with her best friend, and when she confronted him, he abandoned them both, leaving them to carry the heavy burden of shame. The family was shunned by the town, branded as outcasts for something that wasn't their fault, punished for their father's sins. This unbearable shame is what pushed Kathy to take her own life, and Natalie found her hanging from the rafters in the barn. It was the heartbreaking tragedy that shaped Natalie's life, dedicating herself to helping others and earning the trust of her patients, who confided in her their deepest secrets, even the darkest ones. As she explains, all three of her victims had their own wrongdoings. John Lamptey had two wives. Jane Spencer had lied to the police about her husband abusing her to secure a divorce settlement, and Alana had been cheating on her husband. For Natalie, their sins justified their fate in her mind, a twisted sense of justice she had carried with her for years. Lewis refuses to believe Natalie's explanation, but she calmly lays out the clues behind the case, revealing the truth he couldn't see. She explains that Alana had been found drunk in a hotel bar, dressed up and without her wedding ring. Her lover had even visited her at the hospital, a detail that made everything fall into place. Natalie admits she killed the Charleston Three because she saw them as sinners, unable to forgive their wrongdoings. Lewis, disturbed by this confession, leaves the cellar, his mind racing with the unsettling truth about his wife's secret life. Back in the living room, he watches another video, and as Alana behaves strangely, ignoring a call to her cell phone, the weight of Natalie's words starts to sink in, and for the first time, Lewis begins to believe her. The confirmation of Natalie's words sends Lewis into an emotional breakdown, and in a fit of fury, he starts destroying everything in the house, his cries of anguish echoing through the empty rooms. Shaken and desperate, he eventually gets into his car and drives away, leaving the chaos behind. Meanwhile, Natalie, clinging to any hope of escape, finds a broken piece of her phone and realizes she can use it to finally pry the tile shard free from the floor. Meanwhile, Lewis reaches the lake he once visited with his wife, only to be confronted by two cops who ask about his injuries and his address, investigating a call that described a car matching his. After briefly checking his license and the trunk of his car, the officers let him go, and with a heavy heart, Lewis decides to return home, unaware of the storm waiting for him there. Lewis enters the cellar, his anger and pain evident as he crouches in front of Natalie, accusing her of having no right to kill his wife before he had the chance to talk to her. He demands that she turn herself in. But Natalie, defiant, stabs him in the shoulder with the shard of floor tile, then relentlessly kicks him as she declares she is Kathy now and won't let him ruin her new happy life. In pain, Lewis manages to pull the shard from his shoulder, but Natalie, seizing the moment, punches the wound before running out of the room. She searches the kitchen for the gun, but finds nothing, so instead, she grabs a knife and heads back to the cellar, determined to finish what she started. As Natalie rushes back to the cellar, she finds Lewis waiting for her, trying to lock her in again. Quick on her feet, she wedges her arm in the door, stopping him. A brief struggle ensues, but Lewis manages to break free and runs to the kitchen, where he spots his gun on the floor. Just as he's about to grab it, Natalie arrives, knocking it from his hand and launching into a fierce fight with him. In the chaos, she overpowers him, snatching the gun away and pointing it directly at him. But before anything can happen, their tense standoff is suddenly interrupted by Alondra, who enters the house with Lewis' daughter, Summer, in tow. In a shocking turn, Natalie shoots Alondra, then quickly captures Summer when the girl tries to reach her father. Holding the gun to her head, Natalie coldly tells Lewis that Summer isn't really his child. But to Lewis, this revelation means nothing. He pleads with Natalie, assuring her that she doesn't need to turn herself in, and he won't say a word to anyone if she just leaves his daughter unharmed. Natalie refuses, knowing the police will trace her call no matter what, but Lewis counters, revealing that he has recorded everything she said. Distracted by his words, Natalie is caught off guard when Summer seizes the moment to bite her arm and escape. Without hesitation, Lewis leaps at Natalie, throwing her to the floor and choking her until he believes he's knocked her out. But as he steps back, Natalie miraculously gets to her feet, prompting Lewis to shoot her before rushing off to find his daughter. He discovers Summer hiding in the cellar and quickly takes her with him. On the way, they stop by the office to grab the USB stick with the recording, and it's then that Summer notices Natalie is missing. Panicked, Lewis hurries her into the garage and begins getting her into the car. Just as they're about to drive off, Natalie reappears, gun in hand, but when she tries to shoot, the gun clicks empty. This leads to another violent confrontation between them as Summer exits the car and runs outside. Natalie furiously attacks Lewis with various garden tools, determined to end his life, and eventually overpowers him, pressing a pitchfork to his chest. In a desperate struggle, Lewis grabs the fork, pushing it away and using it to strike Natalie, causing her to fall back against the broom that had earlier propped open the garage door. Without the broom to support it, the door crashes down onto Natalie, pinning her as she falls unconscious. The film concludes with Lewis holding Summer tightly, apologizing to her and calling her his child, as the sound of police sirens fills the air, signaling the end of their ordeal.